I'm just thinking about end of life and the whole idea of end of life and how lives tend to end, and you know what kind of understanding we bring to lives and to endings of lives. And I guess I'm just thinking that, you know, the way we understand lives isn't literally. I know that sounds all stupid because we live lives literally, don't we? But I don't think we understand our lives literally. I think we understand them metaphorically, with the main metaphors, as I think I mentioned in Gary's birthday video, being metaphors of stories and metaphors of journeys. You know, all the literature, all the language around lives is about, as I say, stories and journeys. And even when it's not overt and over in a kind of allegory form or a clearly metaphorical form, it's still embedded within all the language. You know, we talk about a career. You know, a career is a wild path, isn't it? You know, that you go on, careering out of control. And if you go to a university or to a school, you do a course. You know, the course is a path. And you know, all our things like birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings and Easter, these are all like milestones or landmarks on this path that we're walking through. And we sometimes talk about these things as being chapters or pages in this book that we're writing, as if it's a, as I say, as if it's a kind of story. And it's one of the difficulty. Well, it's not really difficulty. It's the inevitability. If you are dealing with stories and journeys, which are very similar, and if you're applying life, the journey story metaphor to life, then it's pretty much doomed to end in tears, isn't it, really? I mean, that's how lives tend to... Lives seen as stories that begin at birth and end at death are going to end in tears, you know, at the end. Either, you know, with you smashing into a bridge support on the M6, or the end with you, you know, lying in a bed with tubes stuck in you, not being able to remember your kids' names. That's kind of how they work out, really. That's a bit of a shame, really. I mean, in a sense, it hasn't always been like that. Well, actually, it kind of has, but certainly the idea of a good death, which used to be around, is barely around now. You know, a good death, I guess, used to be a kind of glorious death in battle, which didn't feel very good at the time, but at least as an idea it was held up. Or or a martyrdom even, you know, again, probably not a nice thing to experience, but we have the idea of a valid martyrdom, and that's probably kind of a good death. But the nearest thing we've got to those now is the kind of death that creeps up on you while you're asleep and takes you out while you're not noticing, or the one that takes you out painlessly because of some kind of an overdose, you know. That's which is not really a death at all in any meaningful sense. It's just the snipping out of the last few pages of this story of book of your life, isn't it, really? And just the erasing of that bit, forget that bit. But I think it's but I think this story metaphor is I think it's a bit archaic, actually, because it seems to me that story metaphor comes from it belongs to a time when the only way of transmitting and expressing information is through things like stories, and is through narratives, and is through particularly oral culture, you know what I mean, telling stories. Because when you tell a story, you're pretty much, you're performing in time, aren't you? You know what I mean? You start the story when you open your mouth and breath starts coming out, and you end, and the story ends when your mouth finally closes at the end. And it has that linear quality, you know what I mean? The passage of the story accompanies the passage of the time of its telling. And even when you're starting to write stuff down, I mean, it's a little bit different now, but even when you're starting to write stuff down, you know, if you're writing stuff down on a parchment, you know, it begins at the tightly curled bit and then unrolls out until you get to the explicitus est at the end, you know, and the story has been unrolled and the life has been unrolled. It's that kind of sense, you know. So I think that whole story journey metaphor belongs to a time of oral culture, maybe, and to perhaps writing of a particular kind. This way, pups. But we don't live in that culture anymore. You know, we live in the time of iMovies, don't we? You know what I mean? iMovie. Come on, you two. You got your muzzle on, guy. You can waste your time there. Come on. We live in a time of iMovie, don't we? In Windows Movie Maker, and that's very different. And I think if you're growing up with that kind of culture and that kind of paradigm, that kind of model of how things are put together, you know, there's a potential for difference there, really. You know, because as I say, if you're writing a story or telling a story particularly, the story unrolls in the order in which you tell it. There's no alternative. There's no cut and paste function. There's no edit function. And as I say, even writings are very similar to that. But with internet and movie and hypertext paradigms, there is the possibility of that. You know, when you make a movie, you don't shoot the movie, normally at least, you don't normally shoot the movie in the order in which the events take place. You shoot the movie in the order of convenience. Excuse me, I'm breathless. And that's much more interesting in many ways. And I'd like to, I don't know, this is probably just escapism and avoidance and all that, but never mind. I think it'd be quite nice to think of life and death and those processes as being non-sequential, or the sequencing being fairly arbitrary, a bit like Billy Pilgrim in Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, actually, where he shuttles backwards and forwards through his life and through time. But similar kind of thing, you know. So even though our life is lived in this particular order, it's kind of arbitrary, really. You know, we could, if someone was to film all of our life, it could be edited in a different way. And that scene that will be the last scene in my life, you know, that I actually shoot, that scene where I'm piling into a motorway bridge support in the M6, you know, splattered across the windscreen, that one. Or maybe the alternative ending, or the alternative scene, you know, where I'm on life support, effectively brain dead, you know, with all my organs failing inside of me. That scene, although it's the end scene, the last scene I'll shoot, perhaps it'll come about halfway through, you know. That'll be a particular point in the narrative and the story in the movie when the protagonist, that is myself, is at a particularly low ebb. But just after that scene, I'd put a different scene. I'd put one, oh, I don't know, a scene of redemption, a scene of recovery, a scene of untapped resources becoming available. And then I build some other scenes beyond that. You know, and ideally end on a high note, if I had to end it at all. Bearing in mind that it's all arbitrary, you know, I could always go back and make another ending if I choose to, or put them in a different order. So a bit further on, you know what I mean, towards the end there, I'd lift the spirits of the viewing audience by having a scene set in a maternity ward where there's these two nurses all dressed in green and with their arms out like that. Two arms, obviously, because I've got a camera in one arm. And with green towels draped across. There'd be that scene, and that huge Nigerian doctor with tribal scars on his face, lifting up one kid after another out of a cut in a woman's tummy, like that, putting them on the green towels. I put that scene in a bit later on, so that was cool. I'd put Newcastle upon Tyne, early 1980s, 2 or 3 months there, some time spent in a pub called the Broken Doll, and then a nightclub called Rock Shots in Newcastle. That scene would be in later on, of wild dancing and drug taking and sexual freedom. That was great. That would be a happy scene to go a bit further on. And then there'd be some other scenes that I haven't really thought about yet, because I haven't reached that point in my life where I've lived those scenes yet. But yeah, not quite sure what the ending scene would. Actually, I do know what the ending scene. I think the last scene in the movie that I make after the fact will be the suicide scene. I think that would be great. It'll be a bit like this, actually. It'll be a suicide in front of a camera, and it would be me saying things about, well, this is my life and there's been good bits and bad bits, and this is how I imagine it ending in bridge supports, and this is how I could alternative imagine it in on life supports of in hospitals, the other kind of support. But this is how it's going to end, I would say. And you would see me taking some medication of some kind, and and then just perhaps reeling off the edit of my life that I'd like someone to make. Great filmmaker in the sky. Yeah, that'd be nice.